Zoe sighed as she hurried through the crowded sidewalk, adjusting the strap of her worn-out messenger bag. It had been a long day at the bookstore, and all she wanted was to get home, put on her comfiest pajamas, and curl up with a cup of tea. But just as she turned the corner, she nearly tripped over a small, colorful backpack lying abandoned on the pavement. She bent down, picking it up. It was bright blue with a rocket ship embroidered on the front, and a name tag was attached to the zipper. Liam Bennett. Her heart clenched. Some poor kid must be frantic right now, searching for his lost backpack. Zoe glanced around, hoping to spot a distressed child or a worried parent, but the street was filled with busy professionals rushing home, none of them paying any attention. She made a quick decision. She couldn't just leave it there. She unzipped the front pocket and found a school ID card inside. Silverwood Academy. That was the fancy private school a few blocks away. Without hesitation, she turned on her heel and walked toward it, hoping someone would still be there. The sun had started to set, casting a warm golden glow over the city as she reached the school gates. A security guard stood outside, eyeing her curiously. "Excuse me," Zoe said, holding up the backpack. "I found this on the sidewalk, and I think it belongs to a student here, Liam Bennett." The guard's brows lifted. "Liam Bennett, that's Mr. Bennett's son," Zoe frowned. "Mr. Bennett, the CEO of Bennett Enterprises," the guard said as if it were common knowledge. "You know the billionaire?" Zoe blinked. A billionaire's kid. She had expected a worried parent, not one of the richest men in the city. Okay. Could you return it to him?" Before the guard could answer, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The back door swung open and a little boy, no older than 6, jumped out. His sandy brown hair was tousled and his bright green eyes were filled with worry. "Liam," the guard called. "Someone found your backpack." The boy looked up, his face lighting up when he saw it in Zoe's hands. "You found it," he ran over, gripping it tightly. "Thank you, I thought it was gone forever." Zoe smiled. "I'm glad I could help." Before she could say anything else, another door of the car opened and a man stepped out, and not just any man. The most striking man Zoe had ever seen. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, he moved with quiet authority. His dark brown hair was neatly styled, and his chiseled jawline looked like it had been carved by an artist. But it was his eyes, piercing blue and impossibly intense, that made Zoe momentarily forget how to breathe. Liam turned to him. "Dad." "She found my backpack." His gaze shifted to Zoe, and for a moment time seemed to still. "You found my son's backpack." His voice was deep, smooth, and commanding. Zoe forced herself to nod. "Yeah. It was on the sidewalk a few blocks away. I figured someone would be looking for it." For a second, something unreadable flickered in his eyes. Then he extended a hand. "Brandon Bennett." She hesitated before shaking it. His grip was firm, warm, and sent a strange jolt through her. "Zoe Carter," she said. "Thank you, Zoe," Brandon said, his voice softer now. "Liam's been upset about losing it all afternoon." "It's no problem," she replied. Brandon studied her like he was trying to figure her out. Most people, when they realized who he was, either fawned over him or tried to impress him. But Zoe simply stood there, unfazed. Liam tugged on Zoe's sleeve. "Do you like space?" She smiled down at him. "Yeah, I think it's pretty cool." "Me too, I want to be an astronaut," Liam declared. Zoe chuckled. "That's an awesome dream." Brandon watched the interaction, something shifting in his expression. "Where were you headed?" Brandon asked. "Home," she answered. "Let me give you a ride," he offered. Zoe blinked. "Oh, that's really not necessary." Brandon didn't look like a man who heard no often. "You went out of your way to return Liam's backpack. It's the least I can do." Zoe hesitated. Every instinct told her to decline, but then Liam gave her a hopeful look. "Please." "My dad's car is really cool," she sighed, unable to resist. "Okay, fine." Brandon gestured for her to get in. The interior of the car was luxurious black leather seats, a sleek control panel, and the faint scent of expensive cologne. She had never been in anything this fancy before. As the car pulled away, Brandon turned to her. "So, Zoe, what do you do?" "I work at Page & Quill," she said. "It's a bookstore." Brandon nodded, seeming genuinely interested. "And do you like it?" "Most days," she admitted. "I love books, but retail can be exhausting." Liam piped up. "Do you have space books?" Zoe laughed. Tons. Brandon's lips curved slightly. I might have to bring Liam by sometime. She raised an eyebrow. A billionaire in a tiny bookstore. That would be a sight. Brandon chuckled, a deep, rich sound that sent warmth through her. I think I can manage. The car pulled up in front of her apartment building and Zoe reached for the door handle. Thanks for the ride. Before she could step out, Brandon spoke. Zoe, she turned, meeting his gaze. Let me take you to dinner, he said, his voice steady but unreadable. Zoe blinked. Dinner, Brandon nodded. As a proper thank you. Her heart pounded. She had just met him. He was Brandon Bennett, billionaire CEO. And yet, there was something about the way he looked at her that made it impossible to say no. Okay, she found herself saying. A small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. Tomorrow night. As she stepped out of the car, her mind spun. What had just happened? She had only returned a lost backpack. And somehow, it had led to a date with a billionaire. Zoe stood in front of her tiny bathroom mirror, adjusting the delicate silver pendant around her neck. She had spent the last 20 minutes debating whether this was a terrible idea. Dinner with Brandon Bennett. It sounded like something out of a dream, one she wasn't sure she had any business stepping into. Her reflection stared back at her, wide-eyed and uncertain. She had chosen a deep blue dress, simple but elegant, paired with shoes that weren't exactly new but still held up well. It was the best she could do without completely overthinking things. A sharp knock at her door made her jump. She took a steadying breath before opening it, and there he was. Brandon stood in the dimly lit hallway, effortlessly commanding the space. He had traded his business suit for a dark button-down and a tailored coat, an air of quiet confidence radiating from him. His gaze swept over her, lingering for a beat too long before he said, "You look beautiful." Heat crept up her neck, but she managed a small smile. "Thanks, you clean up well yourself." A flicker of amusement passed in his eyes before he extended a hand, gesturing toward the hallway. "Shall we?" She followed him down the stairs and out onto the street, where a sleek black car idled at the curb. The driver stepped out and opened the door for them, a gesture so foreign to Zoe that she hesitated for a second before slipping inside. The interior was just as luxurious as before, the scent of leather and something distinctly Brandon filling the space. She forced herself to relax as the car pulled into traffic. "So, where are we going?" "A place I think you'll like," he said, offering no more details. Zoe arched a brow. "Mysterious." Brandon glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "I like surprises." She wasn't sure what to make of that. The city lights blurred past as they drove, the hum of the engine the only sound between them. Zoe wasn't used to this kind of silence with someone she barely knew, but with Brandon, it wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, it felt charged, like something unspoken lingered in the air. After several minutes, the car slowed in front of a restaurant that looked nothing like the overpriced, high-end places she had imagined. Instead, it was warm and inviting, with string lights hanging from the awning and a cozy glow spilling from the large windows. Brandon stepped out and offered his hand. When Zoe placed hers in his, she noticed the slight roughness of his palm, a contrast to his otherwise polished appearance. Inside, the restaurant was intimate, the scent of freshly baked bread and herbs drifting through the air. A hostess greeted them with a knowing smile before leading them to a secluded table near the back. Zoe glanced around. "This isn't what I expected." Brandon leaned back in his chair, watching her. "What did you expect?" She hesitated. "Something flashier. The kind of place where they serve food on giant plates with tiny portions." A faint chuckle escaped him. "I have my moments, but I prefer real food and real conversation." She studied him, searching for cracks in the persona. He was powerful, confident, and undeniably wealthy. But there was something beneath the sharp edges, something that made her wonder if there was more to Brandon Bennett than just the billionaire title. A waiter arrived with menus, but before Zoe could open hers, Brandon spoke. "Do you trust me?" Her brows knitted together. "That depends." He smirked, not in an arrogant way, but in a way that hinted at amusement. "Let me order for us." She hesitated, then shrugged. "All right. But if it's something weird, I'm blaming you." Brandon signaled the waiter and placed an order with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. When the waiter left, he turned his attention fully to her. "Tell me about you, Zoe." She exhaled a quiet laugh. "That's a broad request. I have time." She rolled her eyes playfully but considered his question. "I grew up here, always loved books, which is why I ended up working at Page and Quill. Not exactly groundbreaking, but it pays the bills." Brandon tilted his head slightly. "And what do you want beyond that?" The question caught her off guard. Most people didn't ask. They assumed she was content where she was. "I don't know," she admitted. "I guess I'd love to own my own bookstore one day, something small, independent. A place where people can come and get lost in stories." Brandon studied her for a moment before nodding. "That suits you." She narrowed her eyes. "What does that mean?" A flicker of something softened his expression. "You care, you put effort into things that most people wouldn't. Like returning a lost backpack." Zoe felt an unexpected warmth spread through her. Before she could respond, the waiter returned with their food plates filled with rich, aromatic dishes that made her mouth water. Brandon gestured toward her plate. "Try it." She lifted a forkful to her mouth, the flavors immediately melting on her tongue. She let out an involuntary sound of approval, which made Brandon chuckle under his breath. "Good?" he asked. She swallowed, nodding. "Okay, fine, you win this round." A slow smile tugged at his lips. "Noted." As they ate, the conversation flowed more easily than she expected. Brandon wasn't just listening, he was engaged, asking questions, making observations, sharing small glimpses into his own life. Zoe hadn't realized how much time had passed until she glanced around and noticed that the restaurant had thinned out. She shifted in her seat. "I should probably get going." Brandon signaled for the check without hesitation. "I'll take you home." Minutes later, they were back in the car, the city lights casting long shadows across the streets. Zoe felt the weight of the evening settle in. As they pulled up in front of her apartment, Brandon turned to her. "Tonight was unexpected." Zoe met his gaze. "In a good way." A pause, then, "Yes." She hesitated before reaching for the door handle. "Thanks for dinner." Before she could step out, his voice stopped her. "Zoe," she turned, heart doing something strange in her chest. "I'd like to see you again." Her breath caught. There was no pressure in his tone, just quiet certainty. After a beat, she nodded. "Okay." Brandon's lips curved slightly. "I'll call you." She stepped out of the car and into the cool night air, her mind spinning. She had walked into this dinner expecting nothing. But now, she wasn't so sure. Zoe stepped out of her bookstore, locking the door behind her as the last traces of daylight faded into the city skyline. It had been a long shift, but exhaustion was the last thing on her mind. Instead, her thoughts were tangled with something, or rather, someone she hadn't expected to take up so much space in her life. Brandon Bennett. It had been a week since their dinner, and in that time, he had surprised her in ways she hadn't thought possible. He didn't just call, he showed up. Twice, he had stopped by the bookstore, walking in as if he belonged there, his presence turning heads despite the fact that he never demanded attention. The first time, he had bought a book for Liam about space, and the second time, he had simply leaned against the counter and asked her how her day was going. And then there were the messages. Simple, thoughtful check-ins, nothing extravagant, yet they left an imprint. She had expected a man like him to be distant, too busy with his high-powered world to bother with someone like her, but he had proven her wrong at every turn. Now, as she walked down the quiet sidewalk, she spotted a black car parked at the curb. The back door opened and Brandon stepped out. Her pulse did something ridiculous. "You're waiting for me?" she asked, stopping in front of him. He glanced at his watch. "You get off at this time most nights." She folded her arms, raising an eyebrow. "So you memorized my schedule." His expression remained calm, but there was something in his gaze that made her breath hitch. "I pay attention." A warmth spread through her chest, but she wasn't about to let him see how easily he unsettled her. "And what exactly am I supposed to do with this information?" He took a step closer. "Let me take you somewhere." She hesitated. "Brandon, no work talk, no bookstore talk, just us." The way he said it steady, certain, made refusal impossible. "All right," she said, trying to ignore the way her stomach fluttered. He opened the car door for her and the drive passed in comfortable quiet. When they arrived, Zoe's eyes widened. A rooftop, but not just any rooftop. String lights hung between wooden beams, casting a golden glow over an intimate dining setup. The city stretched out beyond the railing, a breathtaking view of skyscrapers and shimmering streets. She turned to him. "This is." Brandon watched her reaction carefully. "I figured you deserved something special." Her throat tightened. He made it sound so simple. They sat, and as the evening unfolded, Zoe found herself lowering the walls she hadn't even realized she had built. "You don't talk much about your family," Brandon observed at one point, studying her over his glass of wine. She hesitated, then shrugged. "Not much to say. My parents split when I was young. I was mostly raised by my grandmother." His gaze didn't waver. "She must have been remarkable," Zoe smiled softly. "She was. She taught me to love stories, always said that books gave people second chances when life didn't." Brandon leaned forward slightly. "And do you believe that?" she exhaled, considering. "I think people make their own second chances." Something flickered in his expression, but before she could decipher it, he reached into his pocket and placed a small envelope on the table. Her eyebrows drew together. "What's this?" "Open it," she did, pulling out a folded paper. As she scanned the contents, her breath caught. It was a lease for a bookstore, her bookstore. She looked up at him, stunned. "Brandon, what is this?" His voice was steady. "An opportunity." Her heart pounded. "Are you offering to buy me a bookstore?" His jaw tightened slightly. "I'm offering to invest in something I believe in." She shook her head, overwhelmed. This is too much. You don't even know the terms yet." "I don't need to," she said, pushing the paper back toward him. "I can't take this." Brandon's expression darkened just slightly. "Why?" "Because it's not the same if I don't earn it myself." For a long moment, he simply watched her. Then, slowly, he picked up the paper and tucked it back into his pocket. His voice remained calm, but there was an edge of something else beneath it. "You're stubborn," she exhaled a shaky laugh. "You're just figuring that out now." Brandon shook his head, a small smile touching his lips, but there was something else in his eyes, something she couldn't quite name. As the night wore on, she felt the shift between them. This wasn't just casual anymore. Whatever this was, it was becoming something deeper. And that terrified her, because Brandon Bennett wasn't a man who did things halfway, and she wasn't sure she was ready for what that meant. Zoe hadn't expected to see Brandon the next day, but there he was, standing outside her bookstore just as she was closing up. The sight of him sent a rush of something dangerous through her, something that felt too much like longing. He didn't say anything at first. Just watched her with those deep blue eyes that always seemed to see too much. She exhaled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're persistent." Brandon stepped closer, his presence commanding the space between them. "I don't give up on things that matter." Her breath caught. She wasn't used to this kind of intensity. People in her life had always been fleeting, temporary, but Brandon was different. He was steady, deliberate, and that terrified her. She folded her arms, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened. "You think I matter?" His expression didn't waver. "I know you do." The words settled deep in her chest, unraveling something she hadn't even realized she'd been holding on to. But before she could respond, another voice broke the moment. "Zoe," she turned just as Liam ran up, his face lighting up at the sight of her. He held a small book in his hands, clutching it like a prized possession. Brandon placed a steadying hand on his son's shoulder. "You were supposed to wait in the car." Liam looked up at his father, completely unfazed. "But I wanted to show her." Zoe crouched down so she was eye level with him. "What do you have there?" Liam eagerly flipped open the book, revealing a page covered in carefully drawn rockets and planets. "I made this. It's my own space story." Warmth spread through her chest. "This is amazing, Liam." Brandon watched the exchange with something unreadable in his eyes. Liam grinned. "Dad said I should always follow what I love, and I love space." Zoe glanced up at Brandon, surprised by the softness in his expression. He wasn't just a powerful CEO, he was a father who adored his son. Liam turned back to her, eyes wide with excitement. "Do you want to read it with me?" Before she could answer, Brandon's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. "I need to take this." Zoe nodded in understanding, and Brandon stepped a few feet away, his voice low but firm as he spoke into the phone. Liam tugged on her hand. "Can we sit on the steps?" She couldn't say no to that face. They settled onto the bookstore's front steps, and Liam eagerly flipped through his pages, explaining each part of his story with animated enthusiasm. Zoe listened, genuinely enthralled. "You have a real talent for storytelling," Liam beamed. "Do you think people would read my book one day?" She ruffled his hair. "I know they would." Brandon's call ended, and he returned to find them deep in conversation. He leaned against the railing, watching them with an expression Zoe couldn't quite place. Liam yawned, rubbing his eyes. Brandon sighed. "Looks like someone's ready for bed," Liam pouted. "But I want to stay with Zoe." Zoe chuckled. "I think your dad might have something to say about that." Brandon's gaze met hers, something unspoken passing between them. "Maybe next time." Her heart skipped. "Next time." Brandon scooped Liam up effortlessly, settling him against his chest. Liam was already half asleep, mumbling something about astronauts and stars. Brandon's voice was quieter now. "Come to dinner tomorrow." Zoe hesitated, not because she didn't want to, but because this was starting to feel real, too real. Brandon must have sensed her hesitation because he added, "No pressure, just come." And just like that, the decision was made. She nodded. "Okay." Brandon gave her one last lingering look before carrying Liam to the car. Zoe stood there long after they had driven away, her heart pounding in a way it never had before. This wasn't just a passing connection. This was something more. Something she wasn't sure she was ready for, but for the first time in a long time, she wanted to try. Zoe stood in front of the grand townhouse, her fingers hovering over the doorbell. The invitation had been casual, yet standing here now, she felt anything but. She had spent too much time second-guessing her outfit, finally settling on a soft green dress that made her feel confident but not overdressed. Still, nerves twisted in her stomach. Before she could talk herself out of it, the door swung open. Liam grinned up at her, his excitement immediate. "You came," Zoe laughed, the tension in her chest easing. "Of course I did." He grabbed her hand without hesitation, pulling her inside. The townhouse was warm and inviting, a contrast to what she had imagined. She had expected something cold, modern, and impersonal, but instead it was filled with signs of life. Shelves lined with books, a few scattered toys in the corner, and the faint scent of something rich and savory drifting from the kitchen. Brandon emerged from the dining area, rolling up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt. "You're right on time," Zoe arched a brow. "You cook." A hint of amusement flickered in his expression. "I manage." Liam tugged her toward the dining table. "Dad made spaghetti." She turned to Brandon, eyes narrowing playfully. "That's a bold choice, messy, high risk." His voice held a trace of humor. "I like a challenge." As they sat down, the atmosphere was unexpectedly easy. Liam kept the conversation lively, talking about school, his latest space book, and a new project he had started drawing a galaxy mural in his room. Zoe listened, fully engaged, while Brandon watched them both, his expression unreadable. Halfway through the meal, Liam's eyes lit up. "Oh. I almost forgot." He scrambled away from the table and returned with a stack of papers. "I wrote another story and I want Zoe to read it." Brandon leaned back in his chair, a quiet pride in his eyes. "He's been working on that for days." Liam placed the pages in Zoe's hands, waiting eagerly. She skimmed the first few lines, smiling at the imaginative details. "This is incredible. You have such a vivid imagination." Liam beamed. "Dad says if I keep practicing, I can be a real author one day." Zoe glanced at Brandon, surprised by the softness in his expression. "You already are," Brandon told his son. "You just have to keep going." Something warm settled in Zoe's chest. She had seen glimpses of this side of Brandon before, but seeing him here in his own home with his son made her realize just how deeply he cared. Liam yawned, blinking sleepily. Brandon stood, ruffling his son's hair. "I think it's time for bed." Liam pouted but didn't argue. He turned to Zoe. "Will you still be here when I wake up?" She laughed. "I think your dad might have something to say about that." Brandon's gaze met hers, something unreadable in his expression. "Maybe next time." Liam accepted that answer and disappeared down the hall. When Brandon returned, the energy in the room changed. Without Liam filling the space with chatter, the silence between them felt charged. "You're good with him," Brandon said finally. Zoe shrugged. "He makes it easy." Brandon studied her for a long moment. I don't let many people into his life, she nodded, understanding. I wouldn't either, he exhaled, as if weighing his next words. Before you came along, it was just Liam and me. I built my life around protecting him, making sure he had everything he needed. Zoe watched him carefully. And now, his jaw tightened slightly. Now I find myself wanting things I didn't think I had room for. Her heart pounded. She knew what he was saying, but the weight of it made her breath catch. Brandon, I'm not asking for answers tonight, he said, voice steady, but I need you to know that I don't do things halfway. When I want something, I go after it, she swallowed. And you want this. His gaze didn't waver. I want you. The words settled deep inside her, unraveling every doubt she had tried to hold on to. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of what came next. She was ready. Zoe inhaled deeply, her heart hammering as Brandon's words settled over her. I want you. The confession hung between them, weighty and undeniable. She hadn't expected him to be so direct, but then again, Brandon Bennett wasn't the kind of man who hesitated when he wanted something. And now, standing in his home, surrounded by the quiet presence of a life he had built with his son, she realized she wanted him too, more than she had ever allowed herself to admit. Brandon stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them. Say something, he said, voice low. There was no demand in his tone, just quiet certainty, as if he knew she was already his but was giving her the chance to say it first. She swallowed hard, her fingers curling at her sides. I'm scared, she admitted. This is it's happening so fast. His eyes darkened, understanding flickering across his face. I know. I have never been part of something like this before, she continued, forcing herself to be honest. And it's not just about feelings, you have Liam. He's your world, and I would never want to be something fleeting in his life. Brandon's expression softened, and he reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. Liam already adores you, Zoe. And I wouldn't have let you get this close if I didn't see a future. The finality in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. A future. She had spent so much of her life thinking about what came next, but never with someone else in mind. Never like this. Before she could respond, there was a small noise from the hallway. Dad. Both of them turned to see Liam rubbing his eyes, his small frame silhouetted against the soft glow of the lights. Zoe's heart clenched at the sight of him, vulnerable and half asleep, searching for comfort. Brandon immediately moved toward his son, kneeling in front of him. Couldn't sleep. Liam shook his head. Zoe hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. Do you want me to read you a story? Liam's face lit up despite his sleepiness, and he nodded eagerly. Brandon met Zoe's gaze, something unreadable in his expression. Then, wordlessly, he stood and led them both to Liam's room. The space was filled with soft blues and grays, a galaxy mural covering the ceiling, tiny glow in the dark stars scattered across it. Zoe sat beside Liam on the bed, pulling one of his books onto her lap while he curled up under the blankets. Brandon leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching them with an intensity that made her pulse stutter. She started reading, her voice soft, and within minutes Liam's breathing evened out, his tiny hand gripping the edge of the pillow. Carefully she closed the book and stood, following Brandon out into the hallway. He reached for her hand again, his grip warm and steady. Stay, he murmured. She hesitated for only a second before nodding. Sunlight streamed through the curtains as Zoe stirred, the unfamiliar sensation of warmth and security wrapping around her. It took her a moment to remember where she was, Brandon's townhouse. She turned her head, her heart skipping a beat as she found him beside her, one arm draped lazily over his side, his breathing deep and even. She had fallen asleep in his arms, and somehow, for the first time in as long as she could remember, she had slept soundly. As if sensing her gaze, Brandon's eyes fluttered open, locking onto hers. A slow, satisfied smile curved his lips. Morning, Zoe exhaled a soft laugh. Morning. His fingers brushed against her wrist, a silent question lingering between them. She answered it by shifting closer, resting her forehead against his. Brandon's voice was quiet but firm. I meant what I said last night. I don't do things halfway. Zoe closed her eyes for a moment, letting the truth of his words settle inside her. Then when she opened them again, she whispered, Neither do I. His lips found hers in a kiss that tasted of promises of something real, something lasting. 6 months later, Zoe stood in the center of her bookstore, staring in awe at the space that was now hers. The wooden shelves were lined with books, the scent of fresh pages filling the air. A cozy reading corner sat by the window, and in the far corner, a small section dedicated entirely to children's books, complete with a tiny rocket ship Liam had insisted on. She still couldn't believe it. Brandon had helped her secure the space, but she had insisted on handling the rest herself. And now, as she ran her fingers over the polished counter, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. She belonged. The bell above the door jingled, and she turned just in time to see Liam rush in, holding a new book in his hands. "Zoe, you have to read this one with me," she laughed, bending down to ruffle his hair. "Of course, kiddo." Brandon followed behind, leaning against the doorframe, his gaze locked onto her with that same intensity, the same certainty that had never wavered. Zoe met his eyes, and in that moment she knew. This was home. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of what came next, because whatever it was, it would be with them. Together.